So it remains to me now to introduce our final keynote today. Helen Hockx-Yu, now Head of Web Archiving at the British Library, and that's what we're hoping to hear about today. Web archives, to my mind, being one of the really interesting issues around curation. The people who began collecting them back in the 90s, but a lot of people basically said, you're idiots, why are you even doing this? And now I think, the case we well understand, and we're really glad that somebody bothered to think about collecting, preserving, even though they weren't doing it perfectly, and even though there are many, many ways you to criticize this, it really makes one understand the value of curation and the difficulty, I think, of sometimes the time separation between them. But it's also really rewarding to have Helen for another reason. When the DCC was first set up, when that first conference was being planned, Helen was the program manager in GIST for its digital preservation program, and that meant one of the things she was responsible for was making sure that the people in the DCC were doing what they said they were going to do with the funders' money, which included running events like this. And I think she did a great job of keeping them all basically on plan, although I'm sure they would have managed it even without Helen's excellent guidance, but it was really valuable. So it's nice to be able to bring somebody back who had a close association with us in the past and has moved on to other things, and I'm really looking forward to what Helen has to say.
Thank you, Kevin. It's very nice to come here and see many familiar faces, and it's extremely rewarding to witness how a project came about and developed into a sustainable service which has benefited the community. After JISC, I moved to the British Library. I managed the Planets project briefly. Then I was given the task of putting in place people, systems, and workflows to prepare for non-print legal deposit, which required the British Library to archive the UK web at scale. So today, I would like to share some of our experience with you. Let me just set this up. Okay, so the earliest exploration in web archiving started at the British Library around 2001, 2002. But the systematic collection of UK websites started about 10 years ago. First as a member of the UK Web Archiving Consortium. So we shared resources, we came across a lot of issues related to archiving the web. But one of the main purposes of the web archiving program at the British Library, like I mentioned previously, is to get ready for non-print legal deposit. So this happened on 6th April 2013, when the non-print legal deposit regulations became effective in this country, which extends the existing legal framework called legal deposit, which has allowed the library to collect and preserve the nation's printed publications for about 300 years. So my team, I'm here with my colleague Andy Jackson, who you have listened to in the past couple of days. So my team's task is to archive the web. And non-print legal deposit is not just the British Library's responsibility, it's a collaboration of 6 legal deposit libraries. So the legal deposit content is stored in the digital library system, distributed across the UK and Ireland. And in addition to the national libraries, there are additional access points. The UK web. .uk, one of the largest top-level domains in the world. We know there are over 10 million .uk registrations. Legal deposit of website also covers content created by UK organizations and persons using a non.uk domain. We still don't know exactly how long that piece of the string is, but after our domain crawl last year, we know there are at least 2.5 million of those. How do we do this? We carry out a broad domain level crawl of all UK websites we can discover and which we think are in scope. So we have done 2 so far. In addition to that, we carry out additional crawls focused on national events, thematic topics. On top of that, we also crawl more frequently news sites and websites selected by curators across the legal deposit libraries, which would need to be collected more than once a year to capture the changes. So we have 2 collections. One is the smaller one, and the open collection is the one we started building with partners since 2004, based on permissions from rights holders. This small collection now contains over 68,000 point-in-time snapshots of over 15,000 UK websites. It continues to grow. Going forward, our intention is to make use of this for it to act as a window for our bigger archive, which is only accessible as other non-print legal deposit content within the reading rooms of the legal deposit libraries. I mentioned earlier, we have already carried out 2 domain crawls, collected about 88 terabytes of data, compressed, estimated about 4 billion URLs. On top of that, the additional crawls of events, news sites, key sites amount to about 15 terabytes in the last 2 years. Just an example of these events, at the moment we're collecting about UK general election 2015. We are doing a collection around World War centenary. The web archive, the legal deposit web archive, is discoverable through the British Library's online catalogue. It is also full text searchable within the reading rooms. So I started this job in 2008. I don't think my job changed a lot. It just got bigger and more complex. I think this is really well summarized by a journalist for Newsweek who has interviewed me last year. Me and my team, we are on the front line of the most ambitious expansion of the British Library's archiving capability in more than 300 years. And we do take pride in being regarded as one of the best in the business. It is not just the British Library who has made progress in web archiving. Globally, there are more and more organizations involved in web archiving. We have identified at least 42 web archiving initiatives. From 12 founding members in 2003, the International Internet Preservation Consortium grew to have nearly 50 members in 2015. The recent research, a couple of years ago, by Scott Ainsworth, demonstrated that there are at least one public copy of between 35% to 90% of the web pages. And there are about 30 nations which have legislations, such as legal deposit, enabling web archiving at scale. So there are different types of web archives, big and small, different scope, established for different purposes. If we take a look at the global web archiving landscape, it's actually characterized by a highly asymmetric pattern. So we have one big organization, which is the Internet Archive, who probably holds up to 80 or 90% of the archived resources. This is followed by a number of national memory institutions, mostly organized around the IIPC. And there are universities and smaller organizations in the museums, archives and libraries community, archiving their own website or other content, making use of an increasing number of private sector web archiving service providers. So when we look at progress, I think it's time to reflect, to observe, and also to ask questions. So first, I think there's a high concentration of use of technology and practice in the web archiving community. I remember the CTO of the National Library of France, when we gathered last year in Paris for the IPC General Assembly, at the reception on a boat on Seine, he said, all the world's web archiving expertise is on this boat. If it sank, we don't have a history of the web, which is quite true. I think that is, concentration, high concentration, common use of technology and practice. It's great news for interoperability and adaptation of new technology, but there are risks associated with that too. One of the basic frustrations is that while any modern browser can virtually replay or interpret any web pages, our purposefully built crawlers quite often is not up to the job. I sometimes wonder, if you look at the web, which is this global phenomenon, with the loosest sense of national boundaries, I sometimes wonder the organization of the archiving of the web, why that is based and divided on national boundaries. How does that impact? What are the consequences, and how does it impact the access and use of web archives eventually? Those talking about web archives will always tell you how many terabytes of data they have collected. I did that to you just a few minutes ago. Does size really matter? How useful is it if we have a lot of data, it's locked up, and we don't know how to use it effectively? While allowing systematic collection of content on the web at scale, what's the role of legal deposit? How does it shape and change the practice of web archiving? Again, how about our library, our professional discourse? If it wasn't based on the library and archive model, if it was someone else, a different type of organization who first got into web archiving, would they have done things differently? I think the last question I want to ask ourselves is how much, looking back, what exactly is driving web archiving? How does the different stakeholders' requirements play out? How much of our web archiving activities is driven by organizational needs, the needs of the external founders, and lastly, how much of that is driven by our scholarly end users? So these are the questions we attempt to answer and to explore. So much of this reflection would focus actually on the access and use of web archives, which in essence have two problems. One is restricted access. So with the exception of the Internet Archive, which probably has taken a very Silicon Valley kind of approach to copyright, many web archives, I think the openness of the web archives goes the opposite direction of the comprehensiveness of the collection itself. Again, we have a scale issue. The curated, selective archives are great, but they don't have enough content relevant to many researchers. When you face a large-scale web archive, it's very difficult to find the relevant content. We mentioned the national boundaries. When you face a research question, it is really quite often irrelevant. I think it's going to be difficult, for example, to expect a researcher to consult all national web archives one by one if the research question to hand is the global impact of the theory of Pierre Bourdieu on literary fields. Most importantly, the de facto access method to web archives is based on a single use case, perhaps quite deeply rooted in the library's traditional way of organizing knowledge and information, envisaging users browsing individual websites page by page. Here's an example. So this is the entry or access point within the UK Web Archive for all the point-in-time snapshots we have captured of the British Library's website, starting from 1995. I think the concept of web archive matches the way people use and present information on the web. We try to be helpful. We put them, if appropriate, we put them in collections. We also assign subject terms to them. We try to organize them like the way we used to organize printed publications. It's actually interesting to make a note here. Even when we were doing selective archiving in the number of thousands of websites, we didn't choose to catalog them at individual website level. We simply didn't have the resources to do so. Things changed when the scale of our operation moved from thousands of websites to millions. We cannot even spend the sort of attention we used to spend to our selective archive. So in our legal deposit web archive, which contains billions of URLs, the main access method here is full text search. What we're trying to present to users are the facts about the data, things we can objectively say about the content we have collected. Where possible, we still maintain the curatorial structure, such as collections and subject information. But that doesn't cover the whole archive, but a small fraction. So I don't think lack of resources is the main issue related to this individual website or document-focused approach to access archived web resources. This approach is not taking advantage of the possibility offered by technology. So with the rise of digital humanities and other computational-based research, there seems to be a lot of value in looking at the web archives as a whole, looking at the value of the haystack, as some people put it. And web archives, and also we noticed the change in scholarly practice. A lot of researchers started to look at things beyond text as an object of study. Here, I would like to mention the work done by Professor Niels Brugger, who's a researcher at Aarhus University, who started turning his attention to archived web resources around 2007 and 2008. And he was also closely involved in the establishment of the Danish Web Archive. He argued that archived web is very different from the live web or digitized resources. He regarded them as reborn digital resources, and he argues that things such as headers, footers, drop-down menus, sitemaps, breadcrumbs, things other than text is also crucial in the textual coherence or the interpretation of archived websites. Distant reading is another framework which gives us the theoretical basis to explore things other than text. I remember sessions where I was sat down by researchers asking me what exactly does the most commonly occurring error message in a web archive means, resource not in archive. What does it mean? So we actually sat down and looked at it. Yes, it could appear because of a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's caused because of intended boundaries. So not many people know, for example, when we crawl the UK web, by default, we have a cap, a data cap, the amount of data you collect per domain. Not explained. And sometimes we don't have a page in the selective archive because we simply don't have permission for that page hosted on a different domain. When you come to an edge of a national web archive, naturally you would come across resources you can't pick up. And sometimes we impose data limitations, like I just mentioned. But I think because of our focus on presenting the text or the documents to our end users, we just assumed information like this is not interesting. It's not your business to know about this. So I think our best effort in this really is to avoid dead end in navigation. So when you come across this, we offer link to the live web, or there's another neat feature, which I'm going to mention a bit later. So when you step away from the text marked up by HTML, interpreted by your browser and printed on your screen, you actually all of a sudden realize that there's such a wide range of rich semantics available or associated with web archives, which is absolutely worth exploring. So we are looking at statistical overview, scale and distribution of a national web domain, and how that changes over time. We're looking at patterns of change, evolution. We're looking at geolocation, postcodes, type of content, correlation. How does a certain term occur over time, and how does that relate to historical events? We're looking at inherent structure, linked entities, and networks. And also, there are many people doing web archiving. How do our collections link to each other? So what I'm going to show you, one by one, is an example of our work in exploring each of this aspect of web archiving. But before I do that, I have to mention a third collection or a data set, which the British Library looks after on behalf of JISC. And without the support of JISC and the Internet Archive, this would have not been possible. So the JISC UK web domain dataset, covering from UK copies of UK websites extracted from the Internet Archive's collection from 1996 to 2013, has given us so much opportunity to explore a reasonably open web archive collection and to work together with researchers to develop services, understand the potential use and access of web archives. This actually underpins a lot of our experiments and our interaction with researchers, I think since it arrived about 2009, 2010. So my colleague Andy Jackson has presented in the last couple of days. First of all, he gave a demo of an experimental user interface based on this data set. And earlier this afternoon, he also presented the secondary data set, which we have generated based on the JISC data set, which we have made openly available for research. So this data set has truly served as a research testbed and used by a number of research projects, some of which I'm going to talk about a bit in detail later on. So here's an example of a statistical overview of the UK domain. We're looking at distribution of data size per host. We're looking at the largest UK host. We're looking at the distribution of data volume per host. when you start doing this kind of thing over time, I think we could start to look into how the web change. This is an example. I think Andy did this using the selective archiving data, but our intention is to apply similar method to the bigger data set year by year, trying to understand how much content has disappeared from the web, how much remain the same, what kind of change has taken place in the UK web space. We also experimented with postcode-based access. I think there are millions of postcodes in the data set, which we have made available for reuse. This has not gone into production, but this demonstrates how you can use postcode as an entry point to explore and to browse a web archive and eventually arriving at the page where that postcode is mentioned. So we're looking forward actually to more work, probably a better user interface based on this kind of data. So I'll be happy to discuss with people who might be interested doing projects making use of that sort of data. Again, Andy did this analysis of file formats. So this kind of file format analysis has been embedded as an integral step in our indexing process. We use it to support long-term digital preservation, to understand what preservation actions are required to make sure that we can interpret and replay such formats. We also make this information available as one of the facets into the web archive as part of the user interface. We developed the n-gram search, which allows you to visualize the occurrence of a term or pairs of terms, multiple terms over time. Example here is actually by Dr. Peter Webster. When he was at the Institute of Historical Research, he was using this interface to try to understand the controversy around the introduction or the suggestion of introducing Sharia law into UK law proposed by the then Archbishop Ronan Williams, how that discussion evolved into a discussion around his position as Archbishop. We talked about the structure, the inner structure of links embedded within the web pages. I have to say, this perhaps is the most explored aspect of our data set. Here we're looking at examples, outputs of an MA thesis by a student of the University of Amsterdam, looking at 3 different web archive collections, trying to understand the life of Margaret Thatcher as presented in the web archive and how archival practices impact historical interpretation of such a figure. And we're looking at, I think Andy mentioned this previously, we're looking at work done by the Oxford Internet Institute, trying to map the linkages or the interactions on the web between UK academic institutions in the past 15 years, and also comparing that and relating that with their position in the league table to try to understand if there is indeed any correlation. Here I'm going to do something brave. So the links are explored at individual websites level. Here's an example. I'm looking for Peter Bernhill here. Good. So what this shows you is the links to and from the BL.BL, our corporate website in 1996. I think the green one, the green is the website we linked to, and the blue are the website linked to us. And the the yellow one is the website we link to, and the blue one linking to us, but the green one is the one we link to each other mutually. As you can see, in 1996, our only friend on the web is the Edinburgh Library. Thank you, Peter. So now I'm going to show you interactively or dynamically how this web space or our link with other websites in the UK web space changed. Could we please have the video? Pretty, isn't it? Just like fireworks, representing the explosion of the UK web space over time, but also showing you how networks form and evolve on the web. I don't remember what I just said, but the yellow color are the links to the BL, and the blue one is the links from the BL, and the green one represents mutual links. So this is one way of making use of the link graph, which we have made available on our website. And I have also included, I think, a link underneath there, how it is done, which leads you to Andy's source code if you're interested. So links are also explored at much larger granularity. Here is a researcher from Austria, taking a subset of that link graph and try to visualize how websites in the UK link to each other in 1996. I think this has been mentioned and tweeted earlier. There are websites hosted on .uk domains which do not link to .uk, to other .uk hosts, which is quite significant, which brings us back to the question of context. Web in itself is not something neatly divided by national boundaries. What we're trying to do is to impose a structure or a boundary onto it. Sometimes you get this kind of situations. If our task really is to capture the UK's digital outputs comprehensively, we have to consider the dots around the center and think quite seriously how we deal with that. So we developed the Memento service, which is based on the Memento protocol, which allows you to browse past versions of the web as you would browse the current web. What this does is to allow you to link to other web archives, to reconstruct the web, which has been broken down by ourselves in a way. So I did a search of the DCC front page, and using the service, I discovered that there are 368 pages or copies of that page archived by the Internet Archive, and partners, 35 copies by partners using the Archive-It service operated by the Internet Archive. We have archived 33 instances of that page and 11 copies from the National Library of Iceland, which I thought was also a surprise to Kevin himself. So I think this is definitely an encouraging step towards a global, a seamlessly accessible global web archive. So I thought I'd just show you that. This service is available on the Open UK Web Archive. You could have a go and see, if you're interested, how many web archives, participating web archives in the Memento framework has a copy of your page. Right, so I mentioned that since, in a way, since 2008, we started actively working with researchers. In a way, it's perhaps a blessing that we didn't immediately, or we didn't have web legislations, non-print legal deposit legislations, which enabled us to archive the UK web at scale, which give us actually time and opportunity to work closely with researchers to understand their requirements. We, I think, went through a few phases as well. Initially, it was all about collecting. We asked researchers to work on thematic collections. They do selections for us. We have even asked them to describe websites for us. This resulted in the creation of very space-specific but narrow topical collections. And then I think our attention sort of moved from the level of individual websites to the web archive as a data set in its entirety. That's where we started brainstorming sessions, workshops, discussions with researchers. We surveyed them. We asked them questions. What do you want out of the web archive? What can we do from you? What can we do for you? What are your requirements? We realized that there is a lack of awareness and baseline knowledge about web archives. For many researchers, web archive, archived websites is something new as well. They don't know how to deal with it. They haven't used it as a primary source for research themselves. So it's quite challenging when you don't know what you don't know. So that's, I think, when we started working differently with researchers, once we have acquired the Internet Archive data set, we entered a third phase of scholarly interaction, if you like. That is co-development with researchers. So JISC funded the ADA project, which resulted in an experimental user interface. Currently, we're running the big UK Domain Data for Arts and Humanities project, funded by the AHRC, as one of the 21 big data projects. One of the things, an element of the project, is a group of bursary holders who each have come up with a very specific research question, covering a wide range of use cases. This is where we realized it's not a choice between individual websites or big data. What they want is both. Well, we are expected to develop a service which meets a wide range of requirements. So those who have seen Andy's demonstration yesterday would have seen a bit of our shiny new user interface already. What really we're trying to do is to allow query building, allow corpus formation and handling as much as possible regardless of the detailed research question. So we're thinking of a set of in-corpus analysis and expanding, capable of expanding to a whole dataset analysis eventually. So there's no time to go into the details here, but I think Andy has informed people that you're welcome to have a look at the interface, and we did some real-time load test yesterday as well after the demonstration. There is a piece of video which I'm not sure if there's time to show. It's about 6 minutes. This contains a number of leading scholars who have worked closely with web archiving. Let's hear what they have to say about web archives and our provision of services. Can we have the video, please?
In my opinion, we are at an amateur stage, I would say. People are beginning to get an interest is emerging among researchers, but they don't have the necessary tools to study the web in the many ways that they could study it. So what we need is to kind of move from this amateur level to a more professional level. And that also implies not only the researchers, but also the archives.
I think with the rise of the digital humanities, historians in 10 years' time will be using web archives quite a bit more. I don't think you can do a history of the 1990s or 2000s in any of the subgenres of history without doing justice to web archives.
Web archives is the place, that's going to be the place to create those kinds of, that's going to be the data source.
Évidemment, il y a quand même un effet de recentrage depuis 5-10 ans vers le web comme vraiment un environnement extrêmement complexe qui fait l'objet de quantité d'études avec des approches très différentes, sociologiques, politiques, plus technologiques, bibliothéconomiques, etc.
We've evolved to a large set of derivative data sets that now support communications research, political science research, social science research, computing and linguistic research fields. There's a wide range of specialties that are now accessing archival web data for a range of research purposes.
In 20 years from now, web archive research would benefit from the value of looking back in time at this valuable data and analyzing it not just as a prism to the history of the web, but also as a prism to the social history or to other phenomena, also to other media.
L'un des rôles essentiels des archives du web, c'est de contribuer justement à introduire cette dimension temporelle, à faire mieux prendre conscience aux chercheurs eux-mêmes, aux étudiants derrière eux, que le web a déjà une histoire, que les contenus même du web, par leur instabilité évidemment, sont des objets dans le temps et que ça n'a sans doute plus vraiment de sens de parler du numérique comme tel ou de l'internet ou même du web comme tel.
We are looking at different ways of using the web archive. Not just looking or examining past versions of individual websites, but to look beyond documents or text to focus on the entirety of web archives, not just for reference, but also for analytics.
There are limits to the single-page approach to web archive research, and we hope to advance ways of moving beyond the single document approach to a data analytics approach, for example, to look at the archive not just as the history of a document or for surfing the archive, but also for analyzing the full archive as a unit of analysis or looking at different unit of analysis depending on the research question.
As we go forward, it won't be looking at the archives page by page. It will be about searching using data that we've extracted from the archive. So I think that the really important thing is extracting the data.
We know there is a lot of data out there, but access possibilities are really restricted. The exploration, the analytics perspectives are restricted, so we are going to change that hopefully in the next 5 years.
There's still a gap between the archives and their scholarly use. So the purpose of coming here today is to try to bring these needs and infrastructures together to advance the scholarly use of web archives in the future.
Another thing that came across to me today is there's lots of people with archives and people with data about the archives, but they desperately need researchers to use it. It's a bit like having a huge library of books and nobody ever taking a book out to read.
Pour que dans les années à venir, les archives du web soient plus utilisées par les disciplines des sciences sociales, il est nécessaire qu'elles soient beaucoup plus faciles d'accès et surtout qu'il y ait des outils qui permettent une plus facile exploitation de ces données.
The key thing is about telling people that those resources are available, and that's our motivation, really, and that's a global effort.
If we're going to be using web archives, and I think we will, we need to know how web archives are created. We need to know how to use them. We need to know what kind of tools are out there. We should be involved in the beginning of this movement towards web archives.
I think the most valuable lesson we have learned in all this is how this research engagement has impacted the way we archive and store the content we collect.
We know about the old dusty box archive. We don't know anything about web archives, so let's educate ourselves and let's actually sit down at the table and find out what we can learn.
We have to get more scholars interested in this field. So the first task is to get out in the research communities, tell about the sources, and then get some feedback from the scholars. What do you actually need?
J'ai le sentiment, je peux me tromper, mais qu'il est assez inédit de voir se constituer ainsi des archives avec au même moment cette conscience qu'elles doivent être aussi à l'écoute de la recherche, des initiatives comme celle d'aujourd'hui, comme celle d'ateliers, etc., qui mêlent professionnels et chercheurs. C'est une opportunité quand même qui est assez, qui me semble vraiment précieuse et assez inédite. Donc mon seul souhait, c'est qu'on continue comme ça encore pendant très très longtemps.
So I think I'll just stop there. I think you get the gist of it. A lot of potential, web archives, still gaps, and there's still a lot of work to do. So we realize that a set of requirements extracted based on detailed scholarly practice, what we want to do really is to integrate our services into scholars' workflow. So I think I'll stop there. These slides will be made available. These requirements will change, so will the web. So we do have a lot to do. But I thought this is not a self-invitation to give the same keynote in 10 years' time, believe me. But I thought if I were to give the same keynote in 10 years' time, what would I tell you? I probably will still proudly tell you how much data we have collected and how much of that data has disappeared. I hope, however, I will also tell you the discovery, the research, which have come out based on using this data. I would like to tell you that the UK Web Archive is the place researchers go to find historical UK web. In a most obvious way, even the general public can find the inactive website. We will link to many web archives. There will be a single search interface covering all our collections and beyond. And very importantly, the necessary tools to explore and use Web Archive are defined, are known to researchers, and not necessarily developed by our team, by my team, or the Web Archives. I think what we're looking at is the flexibility to reconstruct the context appropriate to the research questions. And also, without doubt, or hopefully, we will have a crawler or crawlers as capable as modern browsers, that we don't have to stand here and tell you, there are gaps in the web archives, not the dynamic content, please, not social networks, not rich media. I hope we don't have to cover that. And I also hope that some of the legal deposit content, at least the derivative or the secondary data sets, are openly available. And I hope someone in the audience would pull a version of my talk today on the phone and verify if my predictions have come true. So I actually have a favor to ask before I finish. We're recruiting. So if you like what you've heard, and if you like, you're capable, please join us. Consider joining us. The closing date for the developers role is, I think, midnight, 15th of February. And if you want to, if you're interested, want to have any details, speak to me or Andy here afterwards. So that's it. Thank you for listening. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Are there any countries in which the legal deposit rules are more generous, and if so, has anything bad happened there?
Yes, Estonia is the country with legal deposit legislations and no restriction on access. Unfortunately, the National Library, I believe, are still finding resources to carry out domain-scale web archiving. So nothing bad happened yet, apart from the fact that some resources may have disappeared in the meantime.
Oh. So kind of nothing bad and nothing good, almost.
There's no free lunch.
Another question from and then we'll move on.
Very quick one. We've heard about the right to remain anonymous on the web. Does that apply to web archives as well?
It does. However, the basis, what we use really is the Data Protection and Act as a basis to make sure that whatever we archive and provide access to do not breach Data Protection Act and also have no impact on individuals. I think end of the day, the emphasis of this is not about rights to be forgotten, but the rights to be remembered.
Peter Burnhill, one small correction for the record, so as it's understood that the real hero was actually Brenda Moon, the first appointed woman librarian in Scotland, who made sure that actually there were always links to the British Library, and thank you for being our friend.
Thank you, Peter.
One question by way of comment. Obviously, extraordinarily impressive. One of the things, though, in some of the analysis we did of US electronic theses, of their links from their references to the web, when we looked across what had been archived, we found there was only a 50-50 chance that what was in those references had been archived. Now, we may not have been looking in the right places, but working with Herbert, we were doing pretty well using the Memento technology. That also indicates that it's always important, I think, transactionally to archive what you think is important, as well as what happens, if you like, routinely, if I would dare call this routine, it nevertheless, programmatic. So we need to not assume that you will catch it all, because you cannot catch every change. And what's important is that you do what you need to do when you need to do it. Yeah.
We should. That's one of the things I listed in as possible requirements. That is archiving on demand. If someone is writing a paper, writing a book, the referenced material on the web should actually can be archived on demand and kept somewhere.
Okay. In that case, I'll just thank Helen very much for sending us away on what I think is an inspirational note there. Thank you.